Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes.
We wanted to draw your attention to our crowdfunding page on Patreon. If you've been enjoying Always Take Notes, please do consider supporting us there. It helps us to keep the podcast going.
If you support us on Patreon, you can get a great selection of rewards, including a shout out on the show and a selection of successful magazine pictures.
If you pledge $10 a month, you also get a free 2-month trial to Otter, worth $26, alongside the other rewards. Otter offers automated transcription and live note-taking for in-person and virtual meetings. I found it to be a huge help when organising interview material.
Thanks again for supporting Always Take Notes. Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, Rachel and myself spoke with the journalist and author Sally Hayden.
We spoke to Sally about entering the world of journalism, about reporting from countries across Africa and the Middle East, and about her Orwell Prize-winning book, My Fourth Time We Drowned.
It's a great episode, and we hope you enjoy it.
Welcome, Sally, to Always Take Notes. It's excellent to have you on the show. Could we start with your initial interest in journalism? I read that you always wanted to be a journalist.
Yeah, sure. And thank you so much for having me. And probably I should say, I think I was at one of your very first recordings of this podcast in London when you did a live one, or Simon anyway did at one point. So thank you for having me on. Yeah, saying I always wanted to be a journalist is probably slightly wrong, because I was always interested initially in reading books. Just, as a child, I read all the time. And then I started reading nonfiction and became fascinated by that, because, suddenly I realized that real life can be more fascinating than fiction. And actually in primary school, I was involved in setting up a school newspaper, which now when I think about it probably was kind of a sign of what was to come. But I didn't actually know any journalists, and I didn't really know how you got involved in journalism. And when I was in secondary school, I won a school's competition that gave me as a prize a camera and a week's work experience in a national newspaper called the Irish Star, a tabloid. I'm from Ireland, to clarify. And yeah, so I went in. That was obviously tabloid journalism. They kind of got me to write about Brian McFadden wearing green and come up with like different puns for different headlines, and brought me drinking in the pub. I wasn't allowed to drink because I was like 15 or 16, but the journalists would all drink. And yeah, it was like very interesting, but not necessarily what I wanted to be doing in the future. And then I studied law, and I kept kind of applying for different internships and work experience. And I did actually try and get a job. I interviewed for like corporate law jobs just because that's what everyone from my class was doing. And I remember in one of them, the interviewers said to me, like, you clearly don't want to be a lawyer, you want to be a journalist. Like, you've been doing this work experience and you've been, writing for your student newspaper, and this is obviously what you're interested in. And still I hadn't kind of computed in my mind that was a career that I could actually go on to do. But yeah, eventually it worked out. But yeah, it wasn't, I don't know. It wasn't necessarily, now it seems like it made sense all along, but at the time I just didn't know how you become a journalist, basically. So
could you tell us about your decision to study law and then also to do a master's in politics? Why did you choose to take that particular field?
I think for me personally, I've always been interested in just figuring out how the world works, and it seemed to me like law was really fundamental in terms of understanding the society that we exist inside. And yeah, I guess that's why I was interested in it. And yeah, doing international politics, in some senses, it was a very different way of thinking, because law is very much about loopholes and, being very, very analytical and figuring things out in a very kind of focused on the minutiae way. And international politics was about looking at kind of broad theories and thinking very theoretically. And I struggled with that a lot at the beginning. But yeah, I was interested in how countries, function, how they kind of interact with each other. And that gave me a chance to look more at that. But yeah, both of them are about just learning how the world works, really, and understanding society, right?
So once you'd had that realization, or someone else had had that realization and told you about it, that you should be doing journalism, how did you go about making your first steps in the journalism world?
I mean, I wouldn't say that it was that I had that realization, but I was always applying for things. Like, so I was always looking for opportunities and applying for everything I could. And I mean, I'm somebody, I worked all the way through like college. I always had jobs, you know, working as a waitress, working in bars, doing all sorts of different things, volunteering places. And at the same stage, I was looking for opportunities that were related to journalism or to writing, or also human rights I was interested in, just generally kind of figuring out what I was interested in. And I started writing for the student newspaper when I was in college and was doing mainly like music interviews. I interviewed like Rizzle Kicks, I remember, if you remember them, and Bill Bailey and various other people who would come to the campus. And basically I just started getting given more and more interviews. I was so shy. So like the first year I didn't even approach the newspaper, by the way. But second year, I think I finally like got the courage and said, can I write something? And then I became known as the person who would just say yes. So if they said like, can somebody go in 1 hour to this place and do this thing, I'd say yes. And that was how I ended up like writing a lot, because the editors just knew they could call me. It's kind of like a mixture of luck and just applying for absolutely everything. And my strategy was like, you know, you throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, basically. And so I went away one summer to live in the US with friends. We do that a lot in Ireland. Like students go over on what's called a J1 visa, and you live like, there were 9 of us in a 2-bedroom apartment, like sleeping on air beds. And basically I had applied for an internship with the Santa Barbara Independent, and I went in there. They took me on, which was amazing. And they got me reporting on a murder trial, which was like really a bit probably advanced for me at that time. But it was really fascinating. And also the editor, he really had a policy that you had to call people up to try and ask them things. So, you know, which obviously you have to do in journalism. But like I said, I was quite shy. And so he'd say, you know, get them on the phone right now. And I'd have to call up like the county sheriff. And the issue also was that my accent was quite strong at the time. So nobody could tell what I was saying on the other end of the line. So I'd call up and they'd be like, what are you saying? What are you saying? And eventually they'd say, I think you're saying you're a journalist, like just send me an email. And I'd be like, okay. So then I'd send them an email. So yeah, it was all these little experiences. I kept applying, got some work experience in BBC as well eventually, working on a documentary about the First World War, but it was kind of the Irish section of like the Easter Rising and stuff, which was part of that. And then I got, at the end of my master's, I got this fellowship, again, just like searching for things, Googling and looking for opportunities, applied for this fellowship that the Irish government kind of supports. It's called the Simon Cumbers Media Fund. And if you're selected, it's for students, like there's a student section. And if you're selected, they give you funding to go off to a developing country, generally what are the Irish Aid partner countries, and to write a story. And you got mentored by a national media outlet. And so this was 2013, and I won it and got mentored by the Irish Times, and basically just got funding to go off to Malawi to do a story about gender equality. They had just elected their first female president. And so, sorry, this is a long answer, but maybe it's of interest to people. I don't know. Basically, I went to Malawi, turned up. Part of the rules of the fellowship were that you had to use social media. So I hadn't really been using Twitter at all before, but I started using Twitter just to say, you know, I'm here in Malawi. I'm like an international journalist, which I wasn't because I had no idea what I was doing. But I started posting some things on Twitter. And people started contacting me and saying, you know, I'm like, loads of people contacted me actually. Like I got an invite to a festival that was happening in Malawi. One of the country's top hip hop artists contacted me. Someone who was running for president contacted me, and they were all saying, you know, you're an international journalist, let's meet up. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but all right. And I went over, I think I was technically meant to go for 1 week with the fellowship, but I ended up just finding like the cheapest accommodation that I could that still seemed like safe enough, and stayed for I think 6 weeks, and ended up like I just like hang out. There was a market. I made friends with the guys who worked in the market, so I'd go down every day and we'd just hang out and play this game called Bow, and they'd tell me like all the gossip of the neighborhood. They knew everything that was happening in the city, and it was just a really, really good introduction to international reporting. I didn't produce a lot, I have to say. I think I did 2 stories in 6 weeks, which is obviously like unheard of. You never get to produce that little, but yeah, it was really, really great. And that started my association with the Irish Times as well, who I now, after a break in the middle, I work for. So,
and you decided to move to London in 2013, I believe. What was behind that decision? Did you feel it was a kind of career necessity, or were there other factors in play?
I moved to London, I think the beginning of 2014. I think it was literally like the 2nd of January. And that was because, so I'd come back from Malawi. I, again, was just working away. I remember I actually was working as both a Christmas elf and in a bar. And I actually ran into my old English teacher when I was working as a Christmas elf in the middle of Grafton Street in Dublin. And he was like, I thought you're a journalist now. And I was like, yeah, not anymore. So I basically got back and I was applying again for everything. And again, I didn't really know anyone in London, but I just thought, Dublin is like much smaller and there's a lot of opportunities in London, and particularly it seemed like there were a lot of opportunities for people who, you could apply. There were open applications for a lot of the internships, certainly. And I applied for CNN, and I was chosen to work between Becky Anderson's show and Christiane Amanpour. And it was 3 months, and I had to start, I think, the 2nd of January. And so, yeah, I just moved over for that. So, yeah, I didn't really know London at all. I like literally lived in the box room of somebody because I was being paid like £6 an hour or something like that, minimum wage anyway, and worked in CNN for 3 months, and it was incredible. And after that, I left London for a little bit, but then I came back. I got an internship at the Financial Times for 3 months, and then I got a job at Vice News where I stayed for nearly 2 years.
And so was it when you were at Vice that you started reporting on migration and the refugee crisis?
Yeah, so I started there like maybe October 2014. Basically, I was like covering all of the news outside the US. So I just had to do everything. And there was a lot of migration stories that would come up. So like every day we'd figure out what are the big stories today, what are freelancers doing, and then because I was staff, I'd take whatever else there was. And that was initially I was doing kind of various news reports from the desk, and then August 2015 I had kind of been aching to go out and be actually reporting, like not from a desk. And in August 2015, there was, I'm sure you guys remember, in Calais, David Cameron and the Prime Minister said something about swarms of migrants coming from Calais. And my editor was like, what does that even mean? Swarms of migrants. So I said, or I can't remember who said it, but basically I was like, please, can I go? I'll do a really great job. And he said, yeah, you can. And I went over with a photographer called Freddie Paxton. I think we just went for 3 days. And I had been given 1,000 business cards for, they just gave them to you at Vice and had never really had a chance to use them. So I went over and everybody I met, I just started giving them my business cards. I was like, just stay in touch with me, let me know how you get on, if there's anything that you want to talk about or you think we should be covering. And yeah, that was my... that led to a lot of contacts, people who I'm still, friends with, or even who have become journalists now, who I've worked with since, and also a lot of stories that I ended up reporting on. But yeah, to clarify, obviously, swarms of migrants is a really problematic, phrasing for what was happening. There were a lot of people who had fled a huge number of different situations who were just trying to reach a safe place, you know.
We've had various people on who worked at Vice at different stages, and what they talked about a bit was the kind of wild ride from an organization that was like lavishly funded and there was loads of resources to then belts being tightened a lot later on. Where in that kind of Vice journey was the period you were working there? Was there lots of money and excitement and availability, or was it the kind of other side of the hill at that point?
So I should say here that I have signed a contractual non-disparagement clause, but I was working there when Vice had been running for a long time, but Vice News was set up in, I think, March 2014, and I started October. So they were still kind of starting up the subsection, which was Vice News. And it was, I think, just after or right when the Islamic State, that documentary came out, which was getting them a lot of recognition and a lot of awards and things like that. And yeah, like money-wise, I can't comment on, their finances necessarily. I know that I wasn't being paid very much. But there was like a differentiation maybe between film and editorial, and I was on editorial. I think at the time editorial for Vice News in London was 3 people, so it was me and 2 editors, and that gives you kind of an indication of the pressure that we were under. And then obviously they worked with freelancers, and at some points there were people on contract outside of the US that were also working for like the London office. But yeah, like mainly it was like a team of 3 of us who were just covering everything. So money-wise, it wasn't even whether they had money. They did send me to some places. I went to Northeast Nigeria for them, and I went to Germany, I think. But yeah, generally I wasn't really able to move around, but that was also because we needed to cover like everything. So yeah, I was kind of stuck at a desk.
When you left Vice, did you then go freelance?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't actually leave Vice. They laid us all off. So out of having no choice, I went freelance.
And how did things develop for you after that, both in terms of the kind of practicalities of the assignments and the work you were doing and this increasing focus on migration?
It was kind of, in a way, it was like quite shocking because we had all been working very, very intensely for quite a long period of time. And like I hadn't really even taken holidays, for example, in like a year and a half when I left Vice. And yeah, it was just like quite exhausted. But at the same stage, like in terms of going freelance, it was very useful because like a lot of people knew me. And so because I'd been covering everything, and more the longer I stayed there, I did get out and about. I was covering things, certainly in London, and I'd often be the youngest journalist. Like I was still in my early to mid 20s. Like, so I'd be at these, like, for example, the press conference with David Cameron and Barack Obama, it was all the political editors and me who were reporting on that. So a lot of people knew me. And in terms of going freelance, that was quite handy. But I think I was also just really exhausted and I didn't know how to do anything. I didn't really know how to pitch properly. My old editor sat me down and taught me how to pitch. I didn't know how to invoice. So I had to learn all that business side of it, which took a while. But yeah, I think... yeah, it was really exhausting in lots of ways. And I think I also said yes to everything initially. And I realized that was really burning me out because obviously I was like worried about money. So I was just kind of saying yes to everything and trying to do everything. And then I realized actually I could be a bit more selective in terms of what I cared about as well. You need to find that balance.
What were some of the challenges logistically in terms of reporting and doing the kinds of stories you wanted to do, in terms of both travel and access, but also things like insurance?
I mean, the challenge is always money. Like that's the number one. I can't even think of any other major challenge. The challenge is always money. So the more money that you have to fund a reporting trip, the better you can do it, the safer you can be, the better insurance you can get, the easier it is to plan everything. I was fronting money for a lot of trips. So when I did travel, like I basically was like working shifts in news outlets, producing and stuff like that, doing social media, which paid better so that I could save up money to both buy my equipment and fund my own trips, which I then hope to sell stories on the back of. And I should say, like, it's great, then obviously you start finding the grants and things like that can support you. And I've been lucky to get like various grants that have been really wonderful. But yeah, money was always the problem. And like when I lived in London, which was till 2019, like I never lived, only in one house I lived in, we had a living room, for example. Like you had to, I wasn't earning any money. I was just like living the cheapest that I could. For I think 1 year, I didn't even live anywhere technically. I had all my stuff in storage and I just like find a place to stay every time I was in London and try and rent it for a period of time so that I didn't have to pay money. Like I didn't have to pay rent when I left the country. So yeah, it's hard to get by on freelance journalism, but it's not impossible. But it just depends how much you want to pursue the things that you're interested in versus how much you want to work for other people on the stuff, that they need done.
We really appreciate your candor, kind of talking about the financial side. As you know, we ask everyone about money and how it interfaces. I mean, did you find that the sheer kind of grind of this after a while, did that start to have, living that kind of hand to mouth existence? What was that like to do over an extended period of time? Was there any period where you thought like, I don't want to carry on with this, or this is not worth it?
Yeah, I mean, I say that, I should say, like, there's definitely people who find it a lot harder than me. And I mean, I am speaking as someone who didn't have like family backup in the UK. But like, for example, I could have moved back to Ireland if I really wanted to. Like, so it wasn't that, there's people who find it a lot harder. But yeah, it is exhausting. But the thing that I think that I found the most exhausting, it's when you're reporting on things that are quite traumatic, you actually need to take breaks, and you need to do that as well, because I don't know, if you're like under particular pressure or you're stressed or you need to get stories out quickly for financial reasons, actually I don't think that you treat sources as well as you should. And I was like very conscious that I didn't want to be putting pressure on sources, to give me information faster than they wanted to, for example, or to give me information they didn't want to give me just so that I could publish something. So I think like for me, that was why I left London, that I was just like, I don't want to be under this pressure to keep publishing. And also, yeah, it was having a mental impact on me as well. And that's like pretty exhausting.
You describe in your book as well the slightly exhausting process of having to convince editors as a freelancer of both the sort of merits and importance of your stories. You said it is impossible to get reports published immediately as a freelancer. Could you speak a little bit about that attitude towards the kind of work that you were doing?
I mean, yeah, I say that there are obviously some amazing editors, and again, I've been supported by so many editors who have been incredible. And like I said, I've got grants as well. And my editors at the Irish Times now, they're brilliant. I mean, I've worked for great editors actually all across the British media as well, and American media. And there are editors who really care. I guess with migration specifically, it did get a bit frustrating sometimes because people would say, well, we've already run a story about a shipwreck or whatever. And also the audience, I mean, when you see the stats, actually, the audience don't read those stories as much generally. Or there are certain stories that they won't care about. And so it's not just that the editor is saying we've already run a story. They're also saying the audience don't actually read it, which is something that I try and tell readers when they complain about the journalism that gets published. I'm like, please support the journalism that you think is important, because editors do actually notice that, and that does play a role in terms of what they commission. I think for me, in terms of migration, I mean, I didn't specifically decide that I was going to report on migration, but I started seeing gaps in terms of where the coverage was or where the investigations were, and my reporting has focused on where I see those gaps. It hasn't been that I just want to report on migration generally. I mean, there are much better people to do a lot of that, and like, yeah, it's not that I want to tell somebody's story either. Like, they can tell their own story in terms of like making certain journeys or whatever. But my reporting has focused on looking for those gaps, and particularly the role of Europe or the role of the West in terms of migration policy and the damage that that is doing in a lot of situations. And yeah, so I don't know if that's explaining it well.
And as you got deeper into this subject, both writing journalism and later with the book, how did you police the line between journalism and activism? Was that something you were conscious of, and has your thinking on that evolved as you've been working in this area?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very clear that I'm not an activist, and I've been asked a lot to, like, to even I say it in my book, actually. There's one part where I went to the EU because I got asked to go to the EU Parliament and talk about some of my reporting, and I kind of was like ferried around to different meetings with MEPs who would be like, well, what are you looking for? Like, why are you here? Why are you telling me this? And I'd be like, at the end, I was like, this is a waste of my time. Like, I'm a journalist. My job is to collect information and, publish it. It's not to go around and meet politicians and then have them kind of like bill someone for their time and not do anything. And also I don't, it's not for me to say what the best policy is. What I'm trying to do is like expose the reality of situations. And I mean, yeah, sorry, I'm probably talking quite vaguely because I don't know if people listening will know my work or anything like that, but like some of the investigations I've worked on, the first big migration investigation was looking at what happens to Syrians who return to Syria, and I worked on that with a Syrian journalist, Ziad Gandour, and we partnered up. He knew a lot of Syrians. Basically, we were looking at, he knew about this phenomenon that people were trying to return to Syria, but then seemed to be disappearing. And he's Syrian. He wasn't able to go to Syria, but I was. And there was a lot of discussion at the time about, a lot of Syrians had arrived in Europe. People were saying, well, why don't they go back home? And we were like, why don't we actually look at what happens when they go back home? Because that's an aspect that other people weren't actually investigating at the time. And what we discovered was that people who tried to return home, particularly men, were being arrested at the airport, imprisoned, tortured, and forced onto the front lines as well. And then, like, stemming from that, basically what happens when you start, as you guys know, when you start reporting on something, you start getting contacted by other people who see that reporting. And so it's not even that you necessarily have decided, I'm going to report on this. It's that people see that and come to you with other information. And so the next thing I then reported on was, or the next big investigation was into the UN Refugee Agency in Sudan. And what I was being told by refugees there was that there was corruption within the refugee resettlement program. So people who wanted to be resettled, which is, the so-called legal route, I think that politicians refer to, they were saying that you had to pay, as much as $20,000 for a family to be resettled to a safe country. And so the system had been corrupted. And I ended up publishing an investigation looking at that, which took me like around 10 months, I think. I ended up speaking to former UN staff members as well. And as a result of that, or at least this happened 2 days afterwards, the UN Refugee Agency suspended resettlement and deployed an anti-fraud team. And they later found one staff member guilty of soliciting bribes and abusing power. And refugees say that situation, it's even now ongoing, but I think the UNHCR deny that. But again, that was a gap, because it was like the way that we talk about migration, there's so much wrong with the framing, but also when you look further, you question these things like, why shouldn't refugees go back to Syria? Or, why don't they use the legal routes? That's actually what I find it interesting to actually interrogate those ideas and make people think a bit differently about what they might understand.
It must be heartening to see your reporting have kind of real world effects. But I was struck when reading your book that you said you kind of struggle with the fact that you have received awards for your work while the subjects you've written about are sort of stuck in the same place, getting little benefit, as you put it. Could you unpack that idea a little bit for listeners?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's something that I've always found a bit uncomfortable about journalism as well, to be honest, is that you'll be like reporting, someone will be telling you something absolutely horrible, and then you report on it, and then you go away, and suddenly you'll be in like, this nice hall with people in suits who are like eating canapes. And, for example, like I remember, and this is not to diss Amnesty at all, because like I understand why they do it, but being at the Amnesty Media Awards for like I think the award was the Gabby Rado Award for Best New Journalist, and I was up against two others, and they kind of like flash on the screen. It'll be like Nawal, who won it, was like, malnutrition in Yemen, and then mine was like torture in Syria. And you have this kind of like horrible feeling that you're like, it's like, are these things being compared, or is one being called more important than the other? And of course, it's not that. That's not the point of the award. And awards are actually brilliant in terms of raising awareness and also spreading information about the work. And also, if you're freelance, getting things published, like convincing editors that they should trust you to do certain stories. They're very useful. But I think that dichotomy between, you can go, like I even say it in the book, there was one part early in while I was reporting on Libyan migrant detention centres, where I was flown to Tunisia, and I actually received an award from the EU for migration coverage. And we were in this kind of fancy cathedral and, drinking wine with all these politicians. And that hundreds of miles away, there are people who are locked up in a detention centre, like basically as a result of EU policy. And so, yeah, I think that's one thing that I've struggled with. I don't mean that in a woe is me way, but I think we need to be questioning ourselves. I think if I stop being self-reflective about that, or if any other journalist stop being self-reflective about that, there would be a problem, because you do what you have to do to publicize, to raise awareness of the topic, to publicize this story. But I don't think it should become about you being, a hero or whatever. And also, I'm very conscious that me, as like a white privileged person, Westerner, I don't want to be the one who's profiting off these situations. And that's been a struggle for me with the book. Like I have said, and I've done this, that I'll give all the prize money to victims, but like still there's that awareness that like even career wise, like I am profiting off it in a way, even though obviously, like I keep reiterating, it's about the topic. So.
Hello, it's Artemis, the producer of Always Take Notes. I hope you're enjoying Simon and Rachel's conversation with the journalist and author Sally Hayden. It's time for the next instalment of our segment, where we share bonus material from previous guests of the show. So this week we're going to hear from the travel writer Guy Stagg, and he's going to tell you about a piece of advice he wished he'd had at the start of his career.
One thing that I wish I had known at an earlier stage of my career is how difficult it is to timetable a writing career. By which I mean I naturally looked at my friends who were lawyers or accountants, and I saw that every 2 to 3 years they got promoted and they earned more money, and within the corporate structures that they existed in, they could anticipate the different stages of their career and roughly map out what their life would be like over the next 10 or 20 years. I sort of hoped I could do something similar, and so I went onto Wikipedia and read up the biographies of writers I admired and thought to myself, oh, well, it'll probably take me 2 years or 3 years to write this book, and then I'll write another book, and then I'll write another book, and so on and so forth. I think it's a natural impulse because it gives you a sense of security. But sadly, no book is like any other book. Each one has its own individual demands, and therefore it's very difficult to really plan beyond even a single book. Like it's foolish to try and map out or plot out or timetable my career. And so instead I tried very hard just to focus on things really day by day or week by week.
That was Guy Stagg, and if you were interested in what Guy had to say, you can listen to our full interview with him via our website, which is www.alwaystakenotes.com. Now back to Simon and Rachel's conversation with Sally Hayden.
We'd like to talk about the book now. And in the sort of spirit of always take notes, we love to talk about how writing projects and books came about. So what the origin of the idea was, and then particularly in terms of getting representation, getting it published. And we saw that it looked like it was quite a challenging project to get started, and that, you know, that when you were first talking to agents, you were being told you needed to write a polemic or to fictionalize it or things like that. So could you take us really to the point of departure with My Fourth Time We Drowned, and how you got it going?
Yeah, and I think we should say, I think we have the same agent, right?
We do. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Patrick Walsh. In terms of how I got it going, so basically, for people who don't know what the book is about, it's looking at the fact that the EU hasn't, to try and stop people from arriving in Europe, basically migrants and refugees across the central Mediterranean route, which is Libya or sometimes Tunisia to Italy or Malta. So people cross the sea and reach Europe, and, you know, if they have a valid refugee claim, which like many of them do, they can then make that claim, but they need to be on European territory to make that claim. So that's why people are making these very dangerous journeys. And since 2017, the EU has been circumnavigating international law to have people intercepted so that they can't reach European territory. So more than, I think, 115,000 people now have been caught at sea like that, men, women and children. And what happens is that the EU is doing surveillance, so flying drones, helicopters, planes above the central Mediterranean, but then it's also supporting the Libyan Coast Guard to intercept the boats, because under international law, a European vessel could not intercept the boats and return them to Libya. And so the Libyan Coast Guard intercept boats of people, force them back to Libya, lock them up generally indefinitely. And I started being in communication with people who were inside these detention centres in 2018 in August. And that just came from a Facebook message that one of them sent me, basically begging for help. So the book is kind of the result of, first of all, that message, and then years of communication with people who were locked up inside detention centres, who had been caught trying to reach Europe and forced back into them. Yeah, basically, I was contacted first by this one person. Then, I mean, we were talking about not being able to get things published quickly. I spent probably like 24 hours or a bit less trying to verify the story. And then I started posting it. I was pitching it to editors. Like, these were people who were desperately in need of help, you know, and they were saying, tell the world, please, like, we're stuck in a war zone. They had been abandoned without food and water. There were no guards there. So they said, please, like, can you, first I was telling NGOs, the NGOs weren't doing anything. So then I said, I started publishing it both on Twitter and pitching editors. And because I started posting the messages on Twitter, the thread then went, I guess, viral. It ended up getting millions of views. And I started being contacted by more and more people who were inside detention. So from that point, I think I was in touch with people like every single day for literally years. And they'd send me evidence of basically what they were going through. And this was across many different detention centers in Libya. And for the first year, I mean, I didn't think, like, it wasn't my plan to write a book. I was just gathering this information. And a lot of the time I was just sending it to NGOs. I wasn't actually publishing it because it was very dangerous for my sources. Like, they weren't allowed to have phones. And so, you know, I didn't want to publish things that would put them in danger or get the phones confiscated. So I was just gathering information, sometimes sending it to NGOs, sending it to the UN, or sometimes publishing, depending on what the sources kind of felt would be helpful. Sometimes putting it on Twitter. And probably like a year in, I started thinking about writing a book. And that was only because, like, I had so much information I hadn't been able to publish. And I also had been, you know, kind of starting to get worried that my coverage was almost leading to people being dehumanized as well, because I had to strip so many identifying features from the people who I was, taking information from, that it was like very easy, I felt like, for an audience to not realize the kind of severity of the human rights abuses that were happening. And so I then didn't realize how you could write a book or get it published. So my plan was I'll like write 1,000 words a day for 2 months, because I thought a book was like 60,000 words. And at this time I had just moved to Uganda as well, so I didn't really like know that many people when I arrived, and I was like, I'm not even going to make friends, I'm just going to write 1,000 words a day. And I was doing Africa coverage then for the Irish Times, so I'd like write a news story, write 1,000 words of the book, as I thought it was. And when I had about 60,000 words, I was like presuming that I could just get a publisher and they would publish it by the end of the year. So then I started trying to find a publisher, found out that it's like really hard to get a publisher. And I talked to 2 people. One was supportive, one was not, and said that it should be an article basically, but worked for publishers. And the other, the one who was supportive said, well, you have to write a proposal. Like you can't just write a book and they publish it. Like you have to do a proposal. So at that point I started working on a proposal. And then, yeah, like you said, I had kind of some bad experiences in terms of being told, nobody's going to read this, basically. Like, you need to make it more commercial. You need to fictionalize it. Like, nobody cares about this topic. No one cares about this region. I need to make sure that's more about Europe, because people won't read things if Europe's not in the title, for example. And that went on probably for like maybe 6 months or 4 months. Yeah, then I kind of got totally disheartened and stopped working on it for like quite a long time, maybe like 3 months or something. And then, I don't know, I just kind of got energy again. I think some friends like encouraged me, and we're like, no, give it another go. So then eventually I got the proposal together and I sent it to, I just cold contacted agents. I wasn't like even looking for contacts or anything like that. I was just Googling like literary agency, and I somehow like incredibly came across Patrick, who has been so lovely, and I submitted to them just through the website, I think. And they got back to me. I can't remember how fast it was, but it was very fast. And he basically said, yeah, I'll send it to publishers this week. Like he called me and he was like, I'm going to make a few tweaks and I'll send it to publishers this week. And he sent it, and yeah, we had the deal within a month. I think five publishers bid on it, and we had a deal within a month of me submitting to him through the website. So like that was incredible. But I mean, it sounds fast, but actually it took me a year to get to that point of trying to do the proposal, and of talking to other agents who weren't, so helpful.
And again, in the spirit of openness about money, feel free to say as much or as little as you like, but how did it work with the advance, given you'd already done quite a lot of work on the manuscript?
Yeah, I mean, you say that I had done work, but actually, because I had written the 60,000 words and then I had spent an entire year on the proposal, what I had written was like kind of out of date, and it didn't really match up with the proposal that I had given. So it wasn't like I had a book ready to submit. They gave me another year to write the book, and I needed that. And the advance, I mean, I think advances generally work the same. I think it was in 4 parts. I don't know that I'm allowed to say how much it was, but I mean, because they split it, like it's not you can't live off it or anything. I was still working as a journalist the entire time that I was, I was freelancing the entire time that I was writing the book, and I was reporting mostly for the Irish Times, but also for others. Yeah, and also I funded my own travel for the book, like as well. I was traveling a lot for it, but I got another grant as well from, I think it's called the Authors Society, who everybody should check out. They give you, if you have a UK publisher, they'll give you potentially a grant, or you can apply for it anyway to supplement the reporting as well. And the advance wasn't bad, by the way, but I don't know if I'm allowed to say what it was or anything like that. But yeah, just that they split it in 4 parts, it's like nice.
I don't think you're forbidden, but it's entirely up to you whether you'd like to or not. I wanted to ask as well about these questions about kind of editorial questions about structure and form and things that you've been having, fighting agents with beforehand. Had they been sort of nailed down by acquisition, or was that being worked out as you were writing the book once you were under contract to do it?
I mean, it depends what you mean, I guess, because I know that it definitely changed from the proposal to the final book. Like, for example, it's much longer. Like, I initially, I told you I tried to write 60,000 words. I think the eventual book is like 140,000 with footnotes, or 145,000. So, like, it's really a long book, which you don't actually realize until they print it out, and you're like, wow, it's like super long. But yeah, the structure, I think, I can't remember, to be honest, how much of it stayed the same. But there were things that changed. Like, and to write a book, you have to do an awful lot of thinking, which, like, I hadn't appreciated when I tried to write 1,000 words a day and then get it published that year. I didn't actually realize that, you know, you really need to think in terms of ways to help a reader through it, you know. And for example, I didn't, like, initially I didn't want me to be in the book. I just felt like it's not a book about me. It's not a topic about me. I just felt I wanted it all to be third person, and I didn't want to appear except maybe at the beginning and at the end. And then I realized, like, to help a reader through, you actually need kind of a through line where, you know, if they get confused, for example, it's very helpful if you can say, I was also confused here, and this is what happened, or this is what I came to understand about this thing, rather than, you know, that you're trying to show it. And there were certain things that happened that initially I wanted to leave out, but actually I thought they are kind of integral to the story, how I experienced this part of this as well. But I mean, I was told by, like, my editor, like, I'm not good at, you know, conveying, for example, how I was feeling in a situation. So there was one time when I got reunited with people, or united even. I had never met them before, but we had been in touch with we'd been in touch for years, like, from detention centers, and I met these people for the first time. And I think I just said, you know, I met them at this place, and my editor was like, but how are you feeling? Like, why are you need to give us something a little bit more there. So that was really a struggle for me. But yeah, structure wise, I mean, that part is really hard, and it took a long time to get nailed down. And I mean, I'm still surprised that anyone has read the book, and I'm so grateful. So I think even then you publish it and you don't know if you've got that right.
When you were writing it, did you have a particular audience or reader in mind, or did you just write it as you wanted to write it and sort of then release it into the world?
I think the struggle for me was that I really wanted it to be a documentation of what had happened. And so, yeah, like, I wanted to try and make it simple so that people could follow it, but I also wanted it to be very factual. One issue was, like, how many acronyms can somebody keep in their mind? Because there's, like, so many acronyms in this type of situation for different organizations and different people who make statements at various times. And I tried to cut it down to, like, really the ones that I felt were essential. And, you know, also detention centers, there's, like, different detention centers mentioned in the book. And, you know, initially I'd been talking to a literary agent who was like, no, you should just have one detention center. And I was like, but that's, you know, I wanted to be documented what happened in all these different places. But I understood that could be difficult for a reader to follow. And so, I mean, I'm not sure that I got that balance totally right, but yeah, that the struggle was I did want it to be readable for anybody, you know, but I also wanted it to be, you know, the evidence of the actual, like, the reason that I wrote it was not to have a book that lost, like, I wanted people to read it, but that wasn't the reason. The reason was that I wanted this collection of evidence to exist and this period of time to be documented, and these atrocities to be documented, because, you know, what is happening as a result of European policy, and I had information that nobody else had, and I just felt like that shouldn't just be thrown away, you know.
The book's had this incredible reception since it came out. It's won the Orwell Prize, it's been nominated for the Baillie Gifford Prize, it's been cited as evidence. What has that experience been like for you of, you know, this project then being received so well and making such an impact?
Yeah, I mean, like you say that, but the thing is that the situation is continuing, you know. So for me, like, that's like kind of the distressing thing underpinning all these, other situations. And so, I mean, I write about it in the update to the paperback that, I've gone through this whole publicity experience, which I didn't really, understand how it works before. But yeah, you have to, you go to a lot of events, you talk about it over and over again, you get asked a lot of questions. And I'm so grateful that anyone is reading it. And I'm so grateful that anyone would ever come to an event that I'm involved in. I'm so grateful to anyone listening to me speak or interviewing me or anything like that. But yeah, like my goal and my motivation for years was just to make sure that people know that this is happening. And I just see all of those things as a way to kind of further that goal, if that makes sense, and to make people question the world we live in, to make them question what they understand of the world that we're living in right now. So I don't know. Yeah, but the awards they've been really helpful. And I'm grateful to all of the judges and all the people involved in them and, the organizers. They've been so helpful. But yeah, that's, that was the motivation.
Helpful in what particular way?
Helpful to get people to read it. Nobody wants to read a book like this, right? So you really have to kind of, all of those things give it a boost. And I said that on the stage, in the, at the Orwell Prize, I said, I don't, I feel uncomfortable about awards because I don't want the focus to be, focused on me. The reason that I wrote the book was to make people aware of the topic. So, and the real heroes are the people who are sending out that information, this book wouldn't exist without them. So I don't say that in a wordy way, that's just the truth.
But it also wouldn't exist without you, right? I mean, isn't there a bit of a risk of you've done something and you've achieved something really impressive here? I suppose I was interested as well on giving the prize money away. I mean, you've talked, candidly and movingly about, the financial challenges that you've had building your career as a journalist. Why did you feel you wanted to give this? I mean, it's not an enormous amount of money for the Orwell Prize, but why did you want to give it away?
It did actually. The Orwell Prize was 3,000, but then it won something called the Michelle Dean Prize, which was €10,000 in Ireland. And that one was sponsored by the Department of Foreign Affairs, which kind of led to an extra ethical challenge because obviously they're implicated in the situation that is happening. And with that one, I actually was should I even enter for this? Actually, I don't know if I knew that the book was being entered, but I was wondering, even do I attend the ceremony or what if it wins? Isn't this kind of, I don't know, this is wrong, but I did go and it did win. And I said that I had to make a speech and I said that basically I didn't even know whether to engage with the prize, that the Department of Foreign Affairs are implicated in the atrocities that are happening and that I would give the money away. I think that in terms of prize money, I just feel a discomfort with, I've said, being a white Westerner who is writing about a topic like this and then profiting off it. And I think that, I've seen that happening a lot. And this is not to say that anyone's in the wrong at all, but I just think, I don't know, it just makes me feel very uncomfortable.
We're coming towards the end of our time, so as a final question from me, you've talked about the sort of personal toll that your work has taken on you. You've had death threats, legal threats, horrid emails, horrid messages online. Is this something that you think you will continue to pursue for a long time or for the rest of your career, or could you see yourself, maybe moving in a different direction, doing different investigations later down the line?
I mean, I think for me, I'm always trying to see where I can add value and also who contacts me and, says, invites me into something basically, because I don't want to be pushing my way into something that I don't fully understand or that I think journalism, it's a bit give and take. It's who also approaches you and what you have knowledge of and what you have tip-offs about in terms of where can you add value basically. So I think for the moment, I'll definitely keep working as a journalist and also as a writer. I really enjoyed is totally the wrong word, but in journalism, I started feeling like there was kind of damage being done, and like I understand it's a format thing, but you can never fully like interrogate, you know, the framing of a situation. Maybe you can't look at the systems that are underpinning it. It's very hard even to look at the language that's being used. And a book, like writing a book, gave me a chance to interrogate things like that. I got to say, wait, why are we using this language, and where has it come from, and why are we framing this like this? And I think that's one of the things that people have connected to in the book, the fact that I actually say, you know, like that I question myself, I question my role in the situation, and I question why, you know, why we speak about certain things in certain ways and the problems that might be causing. And I feel like you can't do that you obviously can't do that in newspaper articles, you know, so I really appreciated the chance to be able to even think like that. It even gave me a chance to question, you know, how I've been operating and how I've been working too.
Just a couple of final questions from me. The first one was about how things work with the Irish Times now, about whether you're on staff or on contract. And the second one is actually a punctuation question, which is about the comma in the title of the book. Because I think when I first saw it, or I think I first saw an early copy, it didn't have a comma. And then there was a comma in the American version. Is there now a comma everywhere? I was sort of fascinated by that from Rachel is now holding it with a comma after my fourth time. Could you tell us about the evolution of the punctuation of the title?
Yeah, that is very perceptive, and very, very amazing of you to notice that, Simon. I was actually wondering, had anyone noticed that, because the proofs went out just without the comma in the cover, but the comma was inside on the cover page. But everything else,
we love commas on this show, so this is our
yeah.
kind of
I was
question,
actually
really.
like a bit embarrassed about the proof. I was telling them off, but I don't know. I checked with many people, and I think there should be a comma grammatically. I feel like that's the best way to have it, but the proof didn't have the comma. But I think everything else has the comma. So that was a discussion. In terms of the Irish Times, I'm on contract for them now as of November 2021. And so I'm still technically freelance, but like I get paid kind of like I'd say a salary, like a kind of low salary, but it means that I get money every month. And I mean, that's incredible. That's like a total game changer. Just knowing that something is coming in. And by the way, I didn't mean to talk so much about money. The only thing, I know that some of the listeners are kind of aspiring journalists, and I just felt like it's important to both to lay out the problems, but also that it is possible to keep going, you know, if you're facing that situation. Because I hear a lot of people saying, you know, if you don't have family in London, for example, you can't make it as a journalist in London. And I don't think that that's always true, but it is really, really hard. And and I really have sympathy for anyone who's attempting that.
It's our bread and butter on this podcast, Sally. So we are delighted that you went into so much detail and spoke about it so honestly. Well, we've come towards the end of our time, but thank you so much for coming on the show, and wishing you all the very best with your projects going forward.
Yeah, thanks so much to you guys.
That was the Always Take Notes interview with Sally Hayden. She's on Twitter @SallyHayde. Her website is sallyhayden.net, and her book, My Fourth Time We Drowned, is published by Fourth Estate. Hello, it's us again. Simon, what was your takeaway from the interview with Sally?
I thought she was another guest that we got on the show at a really interesting time in their career, and that she'd obviously had this amazing year with winning the prize and her profile really skyrocketing. And I thought it was very interesting to talk to someone who was on the kind of hinge point, you know, or essentially kind of moved from one professional level to the next, and how that had been to negotiate, and everything from her own profile going up to how her relationships with publications changed and everything like that. And I thought she spoke very candidly about, you know, the challenges of particularly freelance journalism and working abroad, and how she'd made that work. So I think it's an interview that really has a lot of kind of red meat, to use perhaps the wrong analogy, but of kind of advice that I think, and useful takeaways that people could apply themselves. What do you think, Rachel?
Yeah, I agree. I was struck by what has become a bit of a recurring theme among really successful guests on the show is throughout those tricky early years, that sense of self-belief which propels them through. And as you say, it was great to speak to Sally. Her work has been cited at, really, really the highest levels, and she's producing real public service journalism. So it's been excellent to hear about how her career has progressed and how she's navigated the various challenges of the path that she's taken. What have you been up to, Simon?
I'm still in the mountains for my new book project, which has been good. I spent 4 days trudging up and down glaciers in driving snow, which was actually really fun and really informative, but also quite hard work. It's weird, the sort of time has slightly lost. I can't, it seems to have lost shape. I just seem to spend a lot of time like walking uphill on skis, getting blown around and trying to understand Swiss German. But that has been very good. And actually I'm kind of entering the last swing of this phase of the project, which has been really excellent. What about you, Rachel?
I'm not sure how alarmed we should be by you saying that time has lost all meaning. We're recording this quite late at night, so obviously my brain has fully stopped working, but I'm mostly excited about the return of Succession.
I noted today it had a 5-star review from the Daily Mail, which was not necessarily where I would have expected it. But has it received a critical plaudit from you, Rachel?
I haven't written about it, I don't think. But I mean, I enjoy it. I mean, it's one of those shows that I've come quite close to quitting a few times and they reel me back in. So I'm excited by the fact that lots of critics have said that this is the best season yet. So I will be catching up on that very soon.
Very exciting. Anyway, this has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Simon Acombe.
And me, Rachel Lloyd.
Our producer and social media editor is Artemis Irvin. Our score is by Jess Danheiser, and our graphic design is by James Edgar.
If you'd like to follow us on social media, we're on Twitter at Take Notes Always. We're on Instagram at Always Take Notes. If you'd like to support us on our crowdfunding page on Patreon, we're on there under Always Take Notes. And if you'd like to leave a review on iTunes or get in touch with us via our website, please do.
Many thanks. Goodbye.